Well, welcome to week 5 of church history. I hope you've enjoyed reading the book Christian History Made Easy. It's been a pretty fun road so far. We're past the halfway point, and so we have 5, 6, 7, and 8, and then we are finished. So we're taking a journey from the resurrection to the Reformation. And so we are, like I said, right past the halfway point into the Middle Ages, or in some contexts, we call them the Dark Ages, which I wouldn't call them the Dark Ages because so much actually happened for the heritage of the church. And some dark stuff happened from our history, and stuff that we have to actually face currently right now. It's a criticism of the Crusades. And so I want to shed some light on it because it's often misunderstood. And so we're going to end our journey right there at the Crusades. We're going to spend some time talking about that, but we need to kind of set the groundwork for that. But, you know, there's a lot of division in our country right now, in America. Tons of division. And it's really hard to see. You know, you have one person putting up a Black Lives Matter sign, and then across the street from them there's a Blue Lives Matter sign, which both platitudes are 100% true, but there's a tinge of identity that people have within these movements, and it's causing a division. We see division over probably the last 20 years, the biggest division I've ever seen, and still haunts me to this day, was the Yani versus Laurel debacle. You remember this? There was an audio that came out and somebody said Yani, or maybe they said Laurel. And then some people heard it one way, some people heard it another way. Or how about the gold dress versus the blue dress debacle? That was a big debate, right? Some people saw a blue dress, some people saw a gold dress, or there was actually there was a shoe in there at one point that made its rounds around there. And people are actually divided, like literally divided, arguing over something as silly as that. And so a lot of things divide us, but you know, we can look to our root verse here for this lecture. It is in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 10 through 11, and I'll read it to you. It says this: "Now I exhort you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all agree, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be made complete in the same mind and in the same judgment. For I have been informed concerning you, my brethren, by Chloe's people, that there are quarrels among you." So this book, 1 Corinthians, is actually the 2 Corinthians. We don't have the actual first letter to the church there in Corinth. And so what's happening in 1 Corinthians is Paul's actually answering questions. So he sent a letter, got a letter back with a bunch of questions and things, and now he's answering these questions. So if you read 1 Corinthians, it reads like a Q&A session. So he's just going down the list. And so he's talking about divisions right there at the beginning of the letter, because there's quarrels among people. And then he goes on to kind of cover some of the divisions and some of the clarifications that he needs to make on some of the issues that they're having. But Paul's aim there is to say we don't need division. I've heard it put this way: what is division? Well, die is two, vision is vision. It's two visions. And so there needs to be no division in the church, because a house divided cannot stand. So we need to look to our history, look to our heritage, look at the things that divided us before, and see how they've covered those things, they've handled those things, and not fight about the same old things all over again. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. We want to let history propel us forward. And so, like I said, we're going to talk about a couple of those divisions here, and we're going to talk about a little bit about Islam. We're going to talk quite a bit about the Crusades, because again, I think that they are misunderstood. And so again, root verse there: let there be no divisions among you. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these today. So we're going to make 3 stops. The first stop I've titled A Religion of Pieces. And of course, we're talking about Islam. So back around September 11th, there was a lot of discussion of the religion of Islam because we saw Muslim extremists take over airliners and plow them into the side of the World Trade Center. And we lost over 3,000 American lives, plus the lives of people who were rushing in to save those who were in the wreckage. We lost so many Americans that day. I remember where I was on September 11th, and I know that you do as well. It's something that will live in our memory. It will live in our hearts. It's something that won't depart from us because it was such a monumental moment in our current American history. I was sitting in, well, first I was getting ready for school, and my brother said, "Oh, turn on the news. There's a plane flew into the World Trade Center." I thought, okay, like a crop duster or something went way off path, and never in a million years would I think that somebody would take over a plane and fly it into the World Trade Center. So then I get ready for school. I'm sitting in first period. It was a chemistry class, and we didn't do any chemistry that day. We listened to the radio, and we heard about what was going on. And then eventually we all got to go home because there was a security risk at being at school. And so I remember what I felt. I remember what I was thinking at the time. And what happened in the weeks that followed was there was a lot of anger toward Muslim people. And so there was a lot of unjust cruelty being done to people of the Islamic faith because they were not the ones that flew the plane into the World Trade Center, yet they were being treated poorly. And so President Bush at the time came out and clarified that these were radical, and he used this term, radical extremists, Muslim extremists, radical. And so a lot of stuff started coming out about the religion of Islam, and a lot of Bible teachers and a lot of apologists started saying, okay, well, what is radical and what is just fundamental as far as Islam goes? And is Islam a religion of peace? And so that's why I've actually titled this section, A Religion of Pieces, because you can look at Muhammad and his path to writing the Quran and the movement of Islam and see that it was really taken in pieces. Because in the beginning of writing the Quran, Muhammad claims the angel Gabriel came to him and gave him a revelation about Allah, the one true God, Allah. And so Jesus is actually a player in there, but he is not God at all. And so we talked a little bit about, the Nicene Creed, about how Jesus and God are of the same essence. He has not diminished his deity. He's not a created being. We talked about docetism. He's not a fully spiritual being that seems like he's a human. He's fully God, fully man. Not half God, not half man, fully God, fully man. And so that is not something that Muhammad subscribed to. There was Allah. And so he starts to write his writings down. And he amasses a following. And so the question of Islam, and now we're not going to, Pastor Mike is doing world religions, and so if you want to know more about the faith of Islam, I am by no means an expert, but we're going to look at the historical context of it a little bit right now. So you could take his class next time, and he's probably a lot smarter than me. So is it a religion of peace? Well, most of what you see quoted from the Quran in defending the fact that it was a religion of peace is earlier on in the Quran. In fact, there's a verse right there in Surah 256, and it is, "There is no compulsion in religion." And so at the beginning of this movement, it was, in effect, a religion of peace. It was, let the Christians practice as they practice. Let the Jews practice as they practice, and the pagans, and we will practice as we practice. We know the truth. And so there's no compulsion in religion. But there's a thing called the Law of Abrogation. The Law of Abrogation, and or the doctrine of abrogation when it is pertaining to Islam. Now, I have on my phone a thing called Time Hop. And if you're not familiar with what Time Hop is, it basically collects all your memories from Twitter, from Facebook, and from Instagram, and puts them in your feed. So you can know on this day, 10 years ago, what you tweeted, what you posted to Instagram, or what you shared on Facebook. And so it's fun. Sometimes it's embarrassing because I'll open up Time Hop and I'll see something that I wrote on Twitter and I'm like, oof, that was dumb. That was ignorant. That is not who I am today, 10 years later. And then as you tap through, it says, okay, 10 years, or 2 years, 4 years, 10 years. And it's kind of a cool thing. And so my wife actually posts on Facebook, on Instagram, with Time Hop in mind. She wants to remember these moments in time, and so she knows that 10 years from now, she'll open up her little time capsule on her phone, if it still exists, and be able to relive those moments. But some of those moments we don't necessarily want to relive because it doesn't represent us anymore. And so those tweets are no longer me. So the law of abrogation is basically this. If I tweeted 10 years ago that I hated the movie Iron Man, and today I tweeted, you know what? I really, really appreciate and love the movie Iron Man. What would you believe about me? Would you believe that I hate the movie Iron Man? Or would you believe the latest thing that I posted to Twitter or Facebook? Well, of course you would believe of me the latest thing that I posted. And you might ask me and say, well, you said before that you hated it, but now you're saying now that you like it. Well, the law of abrogation says, or the doctrine of abrogation in Islam, it says that that's not a contradiction. It is an evolution of sorts. This is the new truth. This is the real me. And so if you move forward to Surah 9:5, later on in the Quran, later on in Muhammad's life, and you read this, so when the sacred months have passed away, then slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captives, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Then, if they repent, keep up prayer, and pay the poor rate. Leave their way free to them. Surely Allah is forgiving and merciful. That doesn't sound like the same writing of Muhammad earlier in the book. Well, because earlier in his life, earlier in his evolution of the belief of Islam, yeah, he was cool. Hey, let him practice. But then as he evolved, his practice has changed. And so, is Islam a religion of peace? Well, you need to decide for yourself if the law of abrogation is true, which they claim is, that it's not a contradiction, it is an update. You need to look at the later part of the Quran to decide whether or not they were a peaceful religion. And it's no surprise that in 638, Jerusalem falls to Muslim armies. So Islamic, I wouldn't say extremists, just Islamic practitioners, whatever the word is, came in and conquered Jerusalem. And we see its effects till today. You see the Dome of the Rock is still there right on the Temple Mount. And so there's still conflict. If you ever go to Israel, if you ever have the opportunity to go to Israel, you'll hear Muslim prayer calls broadcast all throughout Jerusalem. And so it has its effect till today. Now, I bring this up because right there it says, slay the idolaters. Slay the idolaters. What are they talking about? Well, to that we have to go to part 2 of our journey. So we have Muhammad. rises to power, starts writing the Quran. Jerusalem falls in 638. And the second part I've titled Nice to Nicea Again. See what I did there? I love a pun. I love a good pun. So, religion of peace is Islam. Number 2, nice to Nicea again. So, we talked about the we talked about the Nicene Creed, right? And the council at Nicea, which was the first council at Nicea. Well, now we're moving into the second council of Nicea. And it has a lot to do with idolatry or icon worship or icon use in worship. And so we see that in this time, the Western Empire, as you read in your book, was largely illiterate. And so because they couldn't read, they relied on visuals to convey the gospel. There's many ways to do this. Now, if you're familiar with the ways of martial arts, you could pick up a book on martial arts and read about martial arts. But to really understand and be able to become proficient at martial arts, you need someone to show you, and not just show you how to punch correctly, how to kick correctly, and all that stuff, how to reach in and grab a heart and pull it out. And okay, maybe that's not martial arts. Mortal Kombat, I think that's what that was. Anyways, so where am I going with this? Oh, okay, so martial arts, yeah, you need a sensei, basically. You need somebody. And so that's kind of like discipleship, go into all the world and make disciples. He didn't say go into all the world and write literature and pass out tracts so people will know how to be Christians, although that has its place. It says make disciples. And so I see making disciples as, you have a disciple maker and then you have a disciple. You have somebody who's discipling you, almost like you're learning martial arts. It's a very visual thing. So that's one way. Another way that the church went was through creating churches that basically were Bibles in and of themselves. And so you see the creation of stained glass windows that told certain Bible stories that reinforce those stories. So you have somebody who's making a disciple, training people in the way that they should go, and then reinforcing it in church through iconography, right? And so you see statues and things start popping up. Well, again, churches became living Bibles. Well, the problem was some of these paintings and statues of Jesus became instrumental in worship. But some started to worry that they became more than just instruments of worship. They started to become focal points of worship. That maybe where is the line between icons and idols? And so there was a debate there about that. And so when you see in the Quran, these idolaters, wherever you find them, snuff them out, that was just as much talking about Christians as it was pagans, because now we see this rise of iconography in the church. So we see this today in church. We see that we have instruments of worship. We have people who are proficient and very gifted at singing songs. We have people who are gifted at speaking. We have people who use screens for reinforcement of the message. We see comfortable places or auditoriums being built so people can come and worship and be comfortable. And all those things are good things if they're used for the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for God's glory. And use those tools. Use your phone. Use what the Lord has gifted us with, really, technology, as we're talking right now. I'm on YouTube teaching a lesson because we can't be together just yet. And so they are tools of worship. They are tools of sharpening each other. But they can easily become objects of worship. We can easily revere the preacher and forget that the message and he's just a vessel. We need to be revering the message. And so we start to place our trust in man. And so right there in 1 Corinthians when Paul's talking about division, the main division that he sees there is they're placing their affections in, no, I'm of Apollos, no, I'm of Paul, no, I'm of Christ. So very interesting. And so this is happening in a different way. And so we have these people who are using these objects of worship, maybe to the extreme. But then you have these people who are like, this is idol worship. And so we need to smash the idols. We need to rid God's house of icons because we worship the one true God. And so you've heard the term iconoclast, right? That's basically icon smashers is basically what it means. And they rise up when there's a golden statue erected of Jesus in the church. And so they come to destroy this golden statue. And as the story goes, people are there to defend the church. And so it's pretty funny. It's, in the book, it actually tells you that there are women of the day that come out with frying pans, basically, and they're ready to fight to protect their statue of Jesus. And so the empress of the time, Irene, which is my grandma's name, so it's kind of funny because you grow up with certain names, you have a view of that. And so whenever I think of the Empress Irene, I think of my grandma. I'm like, wow, yeah, could happen. So the Empress Irene called something to order, and it was the Second Nicene Council, and that was in 787. And basically, it was, hey, you guys need to get together. Instead of you guys being iconoclasts and smashing all the art in church, and you guys defending it, and there's division there, we need to come together and decide what are we going to do. And so basically, the result of the Second Nicene Council was that they denounced the iconoclasts. They said, you know what? No, this has a use. We just need to point our affections and its usefulness in the right direction. And so that was the Second Council of Nicea. So from there on, we move to the third section. And I want to spend some time on this third section here. And I call it the Crusaders of the Lost Art. Crusaders of the Lost Art. And obviously, it really has no point to it. I just really wanted another good pun. So we're going to talk about the Crusades, basically. That's what I'm saying there. So Crusades is an interesting thing because we hear, again, going back to 9/11, religious extremists, right? And that term comes to the forefront. It's kind of in the mainstream, religious extremism, right? Extreme Islam. So if Islam is a religion of peace, you would think that an extreme Islam would be extreme peace, but that wasn't really the case of it. And so, again, I'm not teaching a world religions course here, and so, but it's just interesting in that term, right? And so we've seen people over the history of our nation, even I think it was President Obama said, you know, Christians have blood on their hands too. They have red in their history as well. You know, extreme Christians, and so we come to this topic of Crusades, and that's usually what people are talking about. Christians did some terrible things through the Crusades, right? Which you can't get around it. The Crusades are a black mark on the history of the church. But we have to kind of understand how they came about, and the book talks about it. And there's actually a great YouTube series that if you're interested, maybe I'll link it below. There are 2 40-minute lectures on the Crusades that are well worth a listen if you really want to kind of get a further understanding of how they all came about. But we're going to kind of give the overview and really kind of the what does it mean to us? What is the meaning behind it, and how can we move forward in our Christian walk to avoid making the same mistakes again? So there was this idea that Christians had to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And it was a way of penance for sin. And so what started happening was Christians who were making their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which was now in control, was in Muslim control, were being stopped along the road. and there were tariffs placed on them. And so they started charging them basically money to make their pilgrimage, which didn't sit well with the church. And in some instances, they would lie in wait for them, and they would ransack some of the caravans, especially some of the more wealthy ones, and they would rob them. And so this didn't sit well with the leaders of the church. And so Pope Urban II called for retribution. And he gives a message, and in that message he says this. He says, "Turks and Arabs have conquered their territories. The Lord begs you to destroy that vile race." Interesting. That doesn't sound like something that the Lord would say. That doesn't sound like something Jesus would say. I think my Bible reads a little bit differently. Yet here's this guy saying, destroy that vile race. And people jumped on board. They're like, let's do it. And so this guy, Peter the Hermit, rallies 20,000 people. I like how the book says that he must have not showered in like 10 years. It's like, I don't want to know how bad you smell after that. But if you could rally people smelling that bad, you got to be a really darn good salesman. Anyway, Peter the Hermit rallies 20,000 people. And so the Crusades happen. And they clash in Antioch. There's actually, it kind of plays out interesting. Now, we think of besieging almost like you would see in like the Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't know if you've ever seen The Curse of the Black Pearl. So they're there, and all of a sudden cannon blast, and a bunch of pirates run and just start killing people and taking over and plundering and stuff. It's not quite how besieging happened. Normally what would happen was you would surround the area and basically wait them out. They couldn't get out because if they came out, they would be killed. And so you would basically starve them out into surrendering, and then you would go in and plunder and take over. So an interesting thing happened at Antioch. These basically peasants, they weren't even natural soldiers. They were just normal Christians, peasants, who wanted to make their pilgrimage and fight in this holy war for penance. And so there was this thing called Plenary Penance, which was basically a full indulgence paid for you to escape purgatory. So you're given this plenary, what did I say, plenary? I can't talk today. Side note, last week I was out, I was literally quarantined at home because my wife tested positive for COVID. And so obviously I had to quarantine. I took like 3 COVID tests to make sure I was COVID negative. And so in preparing for this lecture, I got to this part where we're studying, basically besieging, and we're talking about people being literally quarantined to one area and starved out. I feel like in some way, shape, and form, my brain has been starved out a little bit. So anyway, plenary penance. It is a full indulgence to escape purgatory. Basically, it's you do this and you're set. You're going to heaven. Well, that's a dangerous thing because you tell people that, and it almost gives people license to sin. We'll talk about that in just a second. So they clash there at Antioch. Now, an interesting thing happens. It works. They wait them out. They go in and they take over. But then the Byzantine army shows up, and now they're stuck in Antioch. The Christians there are stuck, the Crusaders are stuck in Antioch, and now they're being besieged. It's almost like it's something that you see in Monty Python or something, right? So anyway, then they move to Jerusalem, and this is generally one of those moments in history that we say, wow, look at all the Muslims, because 3,000 Muslims were murdered. It says that the blood was so thick it was just running down the steps. And so they go over there and they kill all these Muslims in Jerusalem. So then later, so that's one black mark on our history, right? and when people talk about the Crusades, they're usually talking about that first crusade, or they're talking about the fourth crusade. Because the interesting thing is, it wasn't just Muslims who were besieged. It wasn't just Muslims who were murdered and plundered. It was also Christians. And you're like, that's weird. Christians killing Christians? Well, it's true. Because later in the fourth crusade, this guy, Pope Innocent III, which is just an odd name to have, right? Pope Innocent III. How could he be bad? You know, it's kind of like Antifa. It's like, well, it's anti-fascist. That's good, right? They're anti-fascist. Well, maybe not. So Pope Innocent III, they go, and he tries to destroy Muslim rule in Egypt now. He wants to take care of that. So he offers money, but he also offers plenary penance for serving. Well, think about this. Who's going to show up to fight? I get sure path to heaven, and I get money. So what started happening is mercenaries started showing up. Likely, many of them not even Christians. They wanted to make their money, and they wanted their license to live the way that they wanted to live so that they can get to heaven. And so you put those two things together, and not such good things happen. So you have these guys marching into war and to conquer, having full confidence that no matter what they do, they're going to heaven. And what resulted was just massacre, rape, torture of even Christians. And Christians, and it says there in the book that Christians said, it's like, wow, Muslims, the oppression of the Muslims seems benevolent compared to what's happening from the Crusaders. And so, not just a black mark on our history was it that Christians in the first crusade went in and besieged Muslims, but the Crusaders came in and besieged Christians as well. So anyway, 1204 on Good Friday, these mercenaries, these Crusaders painted crosses, red crosses, on their chests, and they sacked Constantinople. And again, raped, killed, and pillaged even Christians. And so that's the Crusades. And it is dark. But something that is important to remember is that was not of the Lord. There were flawed men in history, in leadership in the church, that set this into motion. But I'll tell you 100% it was the work of the devil, not of Christ. You cannot say that Christian extremists turn into crusaders, because honestly, Christian extremists turn into monastic monks, as we'll talk about in coming lectures as we move our way toward the Reformation. And so that's what I have for you today. So just to recap, religion of pieces, Islam, Muhammad rises, or Islam rises and takes over Jerusalem in 638. And then we have the Second Council of Nicea, talking about icon worship and use of icons in the church, and when does it become idol worship, which is something that we need to guard ourselves against in the church. And then we talk about the Crusades, which that evil that happened there was certainly not from the teaching of Christ. Certainly not peacemakers right there. So that's what I have for you today. There's a lot more in the chapter that we talk about the Franks and some other. We talk about Charlemagne, who is an integral figure in church history. In fact, Charlemagne was the first real Roman leader that was appointed by a pope. So basically the leader of the church and the empire all at once. And we start to see echoes of that into the Holy Roman Church, which we'll get into again in some later lectures. So if you have any questions, shoot them in the comments below. If you want to make fun of my cranial mishaps, go ahead, by all means. But we'll see you guys next week for church history. And be sure to read chapter 6 of Christian History Made Easy. You could always email me with any questions or comments or concerns. Love you guys, and I will see you next week.